Lord of the Mysteries audiobook by Kevin 341. Private communication. The sight of the towering stone pillars that supported a high dome and the mottled and ancient long table that appeared to have been placed there since hundreds, if not more than 1,000 years ago, entered the eyes. Although Audrey Hall had seen this scene many times, she would still feel a kind of shock that came from the bottom of her heart the moment she arrived above the gray fog. Out of the corner of her eye, she scanned the surroundings and didn't see any new members. She then looked up and bowed to the person in the thick gray fog. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool." Tilda, as she spoke, she suddenly saw a card covered with a complicated pattern on the table to the right of the Fool. It was lying there quietly, casually, like an ordinary object. Is that the card of blasphemy? A card of blasphemy that hides one of the paths of the divine. Audrey immediately understood. After the Fool nodded in response, she subconsciously glanced at the Hanged Man, the Sun, and the Magician, and she found that they had also noticed the card that didn't exist in the past. However, their eyes and actions revealed their doubts and astonishment, as well as their inevitable conjectures. After all, a card that could be placed by the mysterious and lofty Mr. Fool was definitely not an ordinary item. Well, Mr. World's reaction is a little odd. He's not even looking there. Is he able to hide his thoughts so well? Is he really the nemesis of a spectator and telepathist? Audrey quickly decided that, other than Mr. Fool, the card of blasphemy was known only to herself. This made her feel quite proud. It was a feeling like sharing a secret with her parents when she was young while she kept her two elder brothers in the dark. That's a card of blasphemy created by Emperor Roselle, a treasure that countless Beyonders in the mysterious world dream of. Audrey took the initiative to raise her hand after the Magician, the Sun, and the others did their greetings. "Honorable Mr. Fool, I have something I would like to report to you alone." Alone. Alger frowned slightly as he subconsciously tried to guess at the content but was without any clue. Derek and the others were also curious, but they didn't think too much about it. Klein nodded slightly and said, "Sure." Frankly, he had no idea what Miss Justice was going to report to him. After waiting 2 seconds, he blocked off the senses of the rest of the members and gestured to Justice. Audrey sat with a dignified posture and said with a sincere attitude, "Mr. Fool, as I had asked to purchase the Spectator formula at a Beyonder gathering, there has been 2 suspected members of the psychology alchemists who came into contact with me recently through certain nobles. I'm inclined to join them, but only if I can guarantee my own safety. What is your opinion on this?" I've attached great importance to this. Psychology alchemists, from the evidence from various sources of information, it's not considered an evil organization. At present, they might not have a deity that they believe in. Its main mission is to explore and research one's mind, consciousness, psyche, and spirituality. It's more like a scientific self-help group. Of course, among the Orthodox churches, it's also a form of sacrilege since they believe that everyone's spirit belongs to God. And according to Daxter Guderian, the upper echelons of the psychology alchemists definitely have an inclination the original creator, the God that created everything, and they worship him, to a certain extent. A rather primitive form of worship. Many thoughts flashed past Klein's mind as he finally said with a smile, "If you think it's suitable, you can do so. If you encounter a problem, you can seek help from the Tarot Club. Thank you for your suggestion." Audrey instantly felt relieved. Klein thought for a moment and added using a calm and leisurely tone, "Inside the psychology alchemists, there are people planted by the churches, such as informants of the mandated punishers and nighthawks. You have to know how to hide and conceal yourself. Mr. Fool is so nice to remind me to be careful." Audrey slightly bent her eyes and replied with a shallow smile, "In the future, there will also be an informant from the Tarot Club inside the psychology alchemists." "Miss Justice, you haven't even joined, and you're already thinking of betraying them." Klein silently drew an invisible crimson moon for the psychology alchemists. After reporting the matter of the psychology alchemists, Audrey wasn't in a hurry to end the conversation. Instead, she said, "Mr. Fool, I've memorized another 2 pages of Roselle's diary." That was also why she had asked to speak to him in private. If she had conjured Roselle's diary and given it to Mr. Fool under the witness of the magician, Fours, she could imagine that at the end of the gathering, Fours would immediately come to her and borrow those Roselle's notes she had bought in the past. And with regards to this, the goddess could prove that Mr. Fool had seen them all. I forgot to do so previously. One of these 2 days, I'll find an opportunity to tell Fours that the Roselle notes I bought were torn apart by Susie. Yes, torn apart into pieces that cannot be restored. I'm sorry, Susie, Audrey repented in her heart. Very good. Klein knocked gratefully on the edge of the long bronze table to help Miss Justice conjure the diary pages. When he had the 2 pages in hand, he cast his eyes over, only to have his smile gradually stiffen. The first line of the journal read, 6th March. Damn it, I'm almost constipated from eating the food here. This is what I saw at the Roselle Memorial Exhibition. Klein hid his expression and turned to the 2nd page. He found that the contents were still the complaints and novel experiences of Roselle's early days of his transmigration. They were of no practical use. He controlled his expression and smiled. Do you wish to deduct from the gold pounds you have yet to pay, or do you wish to get something else in return? Audrey said without any hesitation, Mr. Fool, I would like to know which path of the divine that card of blasphemy is. You really treat money as dirt, Klein silently sighed, as he didn't hide his smile as he said, that is the Dark Emperor card. The corresponding sequence 9 is lawyer. So that's what it is. After receiving her answer, Audrey felt abnormally satisfied. After the private conversation ended, the magician Fours looked eagerly at the World who sat right at the other end. Mr. World, I will try my best to gather a mystical item or powerful Beyonder weapon in the Sun domain. What kind of deal did you 2 make in private? Despite feeling very familiar with Fours, Audrey wasn't aware of this, so she couldn't help but ask. Fours let out a sigh and said, Mr. World has helped me find the formula to Trickmaster. Mr. World sure is capable at finding formulas. Does he have extensive and reliable resources and connections in this field? Audrey listened in surprise. The hanged man, Alger, concealed his solemn expression, once again reevaluating the world and raising his assessment of him. As for Derek, he felt rather expectant. He hoped that after he finished digesting the light supplement potion, Mr. World would be able to easily find for him the formula for Sequence 7, Solar High Priest. The World laughed hoarsely when faced with the numerous gazes that were staring at him. Miss Magician, before you purchase it, it's best that you chant Mr. Fool's honorable name and request that he pass the relevant information to me. Yes, I have already sought Mr. Fool's permission, and he has agreed to help us. If I'm not satisfied with the items that you have set your eyes on, perhaps I will consider switching to another request. Klein now had 3 alternatives for the items in the Sun domain, so he planned to compare them before making any finalization. One of them was the brooch which old Mr. Eye of Wisdom had mentioned. It had the effect of purifying and warding off evil spirits and letting the wearer use a portion of the spells in the Sun domain. The negative effect was that the wearer would never feel cool, forever stuck in a hot and irritable state. Klein found the mystical item only okay, and since the price could be close to £2,000, he was unable to afford it even if he had sold the Briber formula. Therefore, he planned to wait a few days. If Miss Magician and the lady with the artisan backing her couldn't find something better, then he would cash out the formula and buy the brooch. Okay, I'll give you the information no later than tomorrow. Forbes had confirmed that Mr. A would be hosting a gathering that very night, but she had given herself another day for any unexpected outcomes. When the conversation was over, Alger looked around and said, as if he had already prepared a draft, "I recently took on an investigative mission. I'm not sure if you have any relevant leads. In the past 2 to 3 years, many original native tribes in the southern continent have been plundered, and all their people were taken away. In the various colonies on the islands at sea, some slaves have also mysteriously escaped. Such situations have not happened in a long time since the countries of the northern continent abolished the slave trade. Have you all heard anything that's relevant?" His eyes swept over Justice, the magician, and the world, but he didn't look at the sun. How could a boy trapped in the city of silver inside the forsaken land of the gods know about what was happening outside? Audrey carefully recalled the conversations she had heard at the many noble gatherings, but after a while she said, "No, I've never even heard of such a thing." The magician and the world shook their heads. Is this indicating that slave trading in the black market is flourishing again? Why would they need so many slaves? Klein sat at the end of the long bronze table and thought about the matter suspiciously. Seeing that no one could provide any clues, and how Mr. Fool showed no interest whatsoever by not interrupting, he said without changing his expression, "You can attempt to seek out the formula for Wind Blessed. I will provide you with payment that would absolutely be enough to satisfy you." The formula for the Wind Blessed. He's almost done digesting the potion of the seafarer. Klein activated his spirit vision and glanced at the hanged man. Sure enough, he found that the surface layer of his astral projection was not only pure blue like the sea, but it also had slight ripples, as if slowly undulating. If I do the math, it took Mr. Hanged Man nearly 4 months to digest the seafarer potion. He's often at sea. Audrey also made a judgment based on what she had observed. Another point that Forbes paid more attention to was that Mr. Hanged Man was likely a sequence 7, a mid-sequence beyonder. She nodded indiscernibly and said to herself. After the Hanged Man finished announcing his mission, Derek raised his hand and said with some apprehension, "I've been assigned to go on a mission. I will be heading to the half-destroyed temple that I mentioned previously in the near future. Yes, the one related to the fallen creator. The leader responsible for this operation is Shepherd Elder Lovia. Do you have any suggestions?" 342 The Old Fox Alger Suggestions. "My advice is to stay as far away as possible." Upon hearing the son's question, Klein instantly had such an answer in his mind. However, in order to preserve the image of the fool and see what the others would suggest, he remained silent and did not manipulate the world to speak. After a short moment of silence, Alger turned his head to look at the son. He said in a staid and gentle voice, "You have provided too little information, so it's difficult for us to give any useful advice. The only thing we know of regarding that semi-destroyed temple is the presence of the true creator, or in other words, the fallen creator's unique statue. We don't know what else is there, so naturally, we aren't able to make much of an analysis of the situation. The fallen creator is indeed the true creator. To think that there's faith in the true creator in the city of silver where the sun lives. There's even a temple built. The magician Forbes listened with relish and almost wanted to write it down. Justice Audrey waited for the son's description of the strange temple in anticipation. Derek nodded, his eyes looking up for a few seconds before he said, "In addition to the statue, there are also many incomplete murals with terrifying evil spirits lingering around. However, they have already been eliminated by the exploration team led by 2 elders from the 6-member council. I've yet to see those murals with my own eyes. It's said that it records the prophecy of the end of days and how the fallen creator will save his believers, as well as the corresponding bloody ritual. In the corner of a certain mural, there are some strange characters that appear to be evolved from Jotun. After some deciphering, a few elders believed that they meant Rose Redemption. This might a code name for the original muralist. It might also be the code name of the organization that built the temple and the city. According to the chief's judgment, these murals are at least 1,000 years old. The 1,000 years I'm referring to is the one that you know, but I'm not completely sure. In the city of Silver, W, we use the frequency of lightning to demarcate our days. It's considered night when the lightning eases up and day when there's plenty of lightning. One cycle is a day, and the 4 seasons only exist in books, so we can't grasp the specific number of days. Only the chief can confirm that. At this point in the sun's story, for suspected that she was listening to a fairy tale. A city without the sun, without the red moon, without day and night or changes in the seasons. It sounded unreal no matter how she listened to it. Only fairy tales or novels would make such daring descriptions. And the author has to smoke cannabis and be in a state of psychotic madness in order to create such a city. The first thought that came to her mind after her astonishment was, I want to use the City of Silver as a blueprint for a novel. However, she soon gave up on this idea, for she didn't know what the City of Silver really implied. She wasn't sure if it was a secret that was collectively concealed by the 7 churches, and she was afraid that as soon as the book was published, she, as the author, would have the Nighthawks knocking on her door, claiming to collect the copper pennies in her gas meter. So that's the kind of environment which the City of Silver has. The sun also often mentions of monsters lurking deep in the darkness. Unfortunately, I'm only at sequence 8. Otherwise, I would really like to ask Mr. Fool to send me there for an adventure. No, Audrey, you are no longer an innocent girl. You should be aware of how much danger is involved in this matter. Just as Audrey switched between letting her thoughts run wild while also engaging in self-reflection. At least 1,000 years. The Aurora Order hasn't been in existence for more than 3 centuries. It might not even be 2 centuries old. It's unlikely to be built by them. Perhaps the true creator's faith had begun as early as the 5th epoch or even the 4th epoch. However, the organization that revered him wasn't the Aurora Order. In the next 1 to 2,000 years, the 7 Orthodox churches have been repressing it, causing the true creator's believers to be in a crisis. The churches have destroyed them again and again, and finally they had resurrected themselves as the Aurora Order. Klein, who had some guesses, made his seating posture and state appear unchanged. Derek paused for 2 seconds and continued. A preliminary cleanup of the terrifying monsters in the city ruins and the half-destroyed temple has been done. Our mission this time is to explore the underground parts of the temple. Do you have any suggestions? With your understanding of the fallen creator, what should I pay attention to? My suggestion, Alger said without almost any hesitation, my advice is absolutely not to go. The fallen creator is a true evil god. Even if his temple has been destroyed, it might still contain abnormal danger which cannot be easily detected. If the one leading your team is one of the other elders of the 6-member council, then there's nothing wrong if you insist on going. It will just be risky. But you just mentioned that the person in charge of this matter is Shepherd Lovia, and the true creator is the deity standing at the peak of this Beyonder pathway. Therefore, absolutely do not go, Alger added. Your suggestion is the same as mine, but it doesn't require the sun to describe the half-destroyed temple. You could have come up with this conclusion with the conditions at the beginning. I understand. Mr. Hanged Man, you were doing it on purpose. This way you got a rough idea of the state of the temple without paying anything. You're really just bullying a little kid. Sitting at the end of the table, Klein leisurely reached out his hand to support his forehead. The sun was silent for a few seconds, and seemingly having been put in a tough spot, he said, "But the mission is compulsory." The Hanged Man chuckled and said, "Nothing is necessary." Will you still be participating in patrols before this mission? Find an opportunity and deliberately let the monsters injure you. As for how serious it should be, you can reference the past cases in the City of Silver. At this moment, Audrey read a message from Sun's eyes and movements. That actually works. After a brief period of surprise and confusion, Derek frowned and said, "But I don't have any patrolling missions in the near future," Alger sneered. "You can always pretend to be on the brink of losing control." No, to be precise, you can push yourself to the brink of losing control. Under such a situation, I believe the higher-ups of the City of Silver would definitely not bring dangerous baggage with them on the exploratory mission, right? There is a trick. As long as you keep your spirituality in an empty state for 2 days, you will begin to hear auditory hallucinations and show signs of losing control. If you stop suppressing yourself, then your situation will improve in a week, and you wouldn't really lose control. Of course, your City of Silver definitely has some solutions and contingencies to cure those who show signs of losing control. Your recovery would definitely be quick, so you need to time yourself perfectly. It's best if you start doing so 2 to 3 days before you set off. Derek was stunned for quite a while before he muttered to himself, "Yes, those who show signs of losing control will be placed under control and be quarantined underground in the spire, where they will be treated with medicine, rituals, and mystical items. If the situation isn't too serious, then they only need to consume medicine." Sigh, an honest and good kid has been corrupted by an old fox just like that. But Mr. Hanged Man, how do you know of this trick of pushing yourself to the brink of losing control? If you use this trick often, losing control might really happen, Klein sighed in his heart. Audrey was dumbstruck when she heard this. She felt as though she'd been educated. Seeing that the son was still hesitating as though he didn't wish to lie to the City of Silver's elders, Alger slowly asked, "Do the other elders of the 6-member council know that the fallen creator controls the Shepherd Pathway?" "They don't." Derek shook his head honestly. Alger asked again, "Do you think it's possible that Shepherd Elder Lovia will do harm to the City of Silver? Just answer yes or no, there's no need for any explanations." "Yes." Derek finally couldn't lie to himself. Alger chuckled and said, "So, you are the only one who knows of this matter, but you haven't found a way to warn the other elders of the 6-member council, right?" "Yes." Derek's expression grew heavier. Alger changed his seating posture as he leaned back. "This mission carries immense risk. This is something you know. If you die in that half-destroyed temple, then who will be able to find a way to expose the strangeness of Shepherd Lovia? Who can save the City of Silver from this crisis? The fallen creator is a real evil god. You are not pretending to lose control or lying to others for your own personal interests. You are doing so to save the City of Silver. Comparing your honor to that which is more important." Derek clenched his teeth and nodded solemnly. "I understand. Thank you, Mr. Hanged Man." Audrey and Fours suddenly had the urge to facepalm themselves. He really is an easily fooled child, however. That's good too. It prevents the Tarot Club from losing members in the near future. Klein sighed silently as he controlled the world to say, "I have a question to ask Mr. Sun. This could involve a transaction. Therefore, I'm requesting a private exchange." Klein quickly switched back to himself and nodded indifferently. "Sure." After the others were screened, the world looked at the sun and asked, "Does the City of Silver have a way to remove an evil god's mental corruption on a beyonder characteristic?" This was something Klein had wanted to ask a few times before, but considering that Justice and the others might also be interested, and if the sun was unable to answer questions that involved an evil god, then all eyes would likely be cast toward the godlike Mr. Fool. Therefore, he had restrained his impulse. It was only moments ago when he got inspiration from Miss Justice and came up with the idea of communicating privately. We have never encountered an evil god. Derek answered earnestly, we can only separate a rampager's mental corruption from a beyonder characteristic. That's it. This might actually work. After all, I have the gray fog. Klein suppressed his joy and made the world speak. What do you need in return? It's not a matter of compensation. Sun shook his head. That method and the corresponding knowledge requires me to be at least the captain of a patrol team, or even a strong warrior like the captain of an exploration team in order to be privy to such matters. The former requires being sequence 7, while the latter requires a minimum of sequence 6. Phew, Klein sighed, letting the world hoarsely say, I hope that you can attain the qualifications as soon as possible. 343. By oneself. After the private communication between the world and the sun, the tarot gathering began its free discussion session. Audrey asked with great interest about the unique scenery of the sea and of any strange happenings, while Alger gave selective descriptions according to his own knowledge. Fors listened quietly and was inspired to write a novel about a pirate king, of how he captures a female passenger and has a complex love affair with her, a fantasy that coexisted with reality. Derek could only imagine what the sea looked like based on the paintings in the City of Silver and the corresponding words. In the end, Klein, whose spirituality was gradually drained, announced the end of the tarot gathering, after which he quickly returned to the real world and made up for it with a nap. 7:30 at night, in Empress Borough, inside a particular noble's house, Fors put on a hooded robe. After so many days, she was once again attending the gathering organized by Mr. A. She sat quietly in a corner, and whilst pretending to casually survey her surroundings, she noticed that Mr. A., who was sitting alone on the sofa, seemed a little different from before. This wasn't a change in appearance or temperament, because the other party's face was completely hidden in the shadow of his hood, preventing her from making out anything. The difference she felt was an almost intuitive feeling. Mr. A is no longer as carefree and indifferent as before, with him always looking at everyone in a supercilious manner. The current him seems to be very repressed, like he's trying his best to control something. He feels a lot more dangerous now. In the past, Mr. A was a mountain. Now he's more like a reared-up snake, sticking out its tongue vociferously. The best-selling writer, Fors, suddenly felt grateful that she hadn't gotten Zio to come with her, since she needed to hide matters about the Tarot Club and not let her know that she was looking for something in the Sun domain. This way, even if there are any accidents, my escape would be much easier. She rotated the bracelet, which only had 2 stones left. She was in no hurry to write down her request to hand over to the attendant. Instead, she patiently observed for a while. It wasn't that she was naturally cautious, but the lessons of the past had left her with deep impressions. The 2 stones on her bracelet were evidence of this. After waiting for more than 10 minutes, she finally picked up a piece of paper and a pen in front of her and wrote in deliberately distorted handwriting, seeking to buy mystical items or powerful beyonder weapons in the Sun domain. After handing the note to the attendant, Fors looked around again, but she couldn't find the eternal blazing sun believer, who had helped with the purification and exorcism ritual, among the disguised or masked figures. Trades took place as the attendants shuttled about. The entire hall remained quiet and orderly. After an exchange in the middle of the gathering, Fors' request was added to the 2 chalkboards right in front. Not long after, she received a reply from the attendant. A small slip of white paper was filled with dense words. Mystical item, band of light ring. It can make the wearer an envoy of light, an attendant of the sun. They will be immune to various diseases and wield sacred powers. The wearer can summon blinding light and use several spells in the sun domain. It can purify all dead spirits in a 50-meter radius. It is the nemesis of such creatures. If the wearer is acknowledged by the ring, they will be enhanced. Otherwise, they will be weakened. The only problem is that if the wearer utilizes it too often, they will slowly become a believer of the eternal blazing sun and slowly defend the doctrines and praise the sun from the bottom of their hearts. If you wish to obtain it, then please pay me 9,000 in cash at once. I can wait for you to raise it. 9,000 pounds. For his mouth gaped open, as though the other party was robbing her. This was a huge amount of wealth that she wouldn't be able to borrow, even if she asked someone to lend it to her. Aside from the deposit for the assassination of the Inti's ambassador, the amount of money she had seen so far combined had never been this high. A person with 9,000 pounds in cash was considered a tycoon, even in Backlund. Although I know that mystical items are expensive, I never expected them to be this expensive. Does he plan on getting the 9,000 pounds and not participate in Beyonder gatherings anymore and leave the circle so as to enjoy life in peace? For a moment, she didn't dare to reply to the seller. She pretended that nothing had happened and listened for nearly 10 minutes, but when she received no additional response to relatively inexpensive Beyonder weapons, she got up and went to the washroom. After confirming that no one was around, she closed the toilet door and sat down on the toilet. She recited Mr. Fool's honorable name, told him in prayer about what had just happened, and asked him to pass it on to the world. Klein, who had heard the layered, illusory sounds, quickly went above the endless gray fog and gained a basic understanding of the situation. 9,000 pounds. He mouthed the number, his expression twisting slightly. After silently calculating the amount of money he could raise in a short period of time, he let out a breath, conjured the fake person, the world, and manipulated him to give a response. The negative effect of this mystical item is too serious. I do not wish to be a believer of the sun. You don't have to worry about this anymore. We'll transact using cash instead. Pay 450 pounds and you'll get the formula for Trickmaster. The moment he finished his sentence, he cut the connection. Watching as the world disappeared, he raised his hand to rub his forehead and muttered to himself, "Next, I'll have to see the information on what kind of items that barbarian lady can gather. Otherwise, I can only purchase that brooch from Eye of Wisdom." In the washroom, Forz let out a sigh of relief. She indicated that she would hold the sacrificial ritual as soon as she got back. It's a pity that I don't know the formula for now. Otherwise, I could take the opportunity to see if there are any Beyonder ingredients I need. She returned to the hall and focused on the information on the two blackboards. She didn't respond to the previous note, much less consider bargaining. Even if the seller was willing to discount it by 1,000 pounds, she wouldn't have the money or liquidity to buy it, and more importantly, she felt that Mr. World couldn't afford it either. She stayed until the end of the gathering, and because of Mr. A's changes, she didn't linger or talk to anyone. She quickly left the house. After more than 10 minutes, the gathering came to a complete end, leaving Mr. A and his attendants alone. Slowly, Mr. A got up and walked down the stairs to the basement. Suddenly, his knees buckled and he fell to the ground, rolling down several steps. He was sprawled on the ground and the shadow beneath him quickly turned scarlet red. His flesh and blood melted and mixed into the shadow, making it look like a brand new, skinless, monster-like person that had been separated from his body. Gasp! Gasp! Mr. A's breathing gradually returned to normal as his taut body gradually relaxed. The blood and flesh that had separated flowed back once again. Everything returned back to normal. Mr. A crawled forward and knelt in the basement, once again confessing his sins while choking with sobs. He was confessing for his oversight from before, that he wasn't vigilant enough and caused the Lord's descent to fail. City of Silver, Derek Berg's house. He walked in silence a few times around the table, unable to make up his mind. His reasoning told him that Mr. Hanged Man's suggestion was the best one, but the faces of the other members participating in the mission kept flashing in his mind, and he felt that he had abandoned and betrayed them by pretending to lose control. Is there no way to save them? Should I find a chance to meet with the chief and tell him that the half-destroyed temple belongs to the fallen creator, who's an evil god that controls the shepherd pathway? That he should be careful of Elder Lovia and change the person responsible for the mission. But how should I explain where I got this information from? In their eyes, Mr. Fool would be the same as an evil god. Derek pulled his hair in frustration. The axe of Hurricane was placed in a position that was within reach of his hands. Every time a bolt of lightning streaked past the window, it emitted a faint light. Suddenly, Derek stopped and looked out into the darkness and into the dark sky. It was as if he had once again seen the state his parents were in before their deaths. He found the pain he had experienced when he stabbed his sword downwards. There's no time. I need to make preparations for the future so that I wouldn't be suspected for my discovery of that God being the fallen creator. As his expression distorted, he clenched his teeth and muttered to himself. He then suddenly left the side of the window and went back to the table. He began practicing the light suppliant's Beyonder powers to drain his spirituality as quickly as possible. In the Hall family's luxurious villa, in an art studio, Audrey leisurely smeared oil paint when she heard a rhythmic knock on the door. When her maidservant, Annie, opened the door, she saw that it was her mother, Countess Caitlin. Although this lady was close to 50 years old, she looked to be in her early 30s. She had blonde hair, green eyes, and a beautiful and graceful appearance, enough to attract the attention of most gentlemen. "Mother, is something the matter?" Audrey put down the items in her hand and stood up, puzzled. The Countess looked at her daughter, who was even more beautiful than her younger self. She smiled and said, "I just attended a dinner party. Lady Della said that you're very interested in psychology and that you wanted to hire a tutor, didn't you?" "Yes, but I haven't decided yet," Audrey replied hesitantly on purpose, just like she usually did. How could the Countess not see through her daughter's thoughts? She smiled and said, "She recommended a psychiatrist named Escalante. If you have no problem with that, I'll send someone to invite her to tutor you twice a week. How about that? It's your decision." Audrey's smile blossomed bit by bit. "Mother, come and sit here. I'm lacking a beautiful model." On Tuesday morning, Klein confirmed through the Backland Morning Post that Eye of Wisdom's gathering would be held tomorrow night. He was relieved, as he was no longer worried that his acquisition of the items he needed wouldn't be in time for Miss Sharon's attack on the enemy. To celebrate the good news, he decided to take a day off at the Kellogg Club. 344, spending lavishly underground shooting range of the Kellogg Club. When he was done shooting, Klein meticulously serviced his free revolver and adjusted the ratio of purifying bullets, demon hunting bullets, and exorcism bullets to 3-1-1. Phew. He exhaled, put away the revolver, tidied his coat, and slowly walked back to the hall on the first floor. He had already heard from the attendant that the dish that was in limited supply today was pan-fried dragon-bone fish. As soon as he entered the buffet cafeteria, Klein saw an acquaintance, Talem Dumont, the equestrian teacher from an abject noble family with short brown curls. He was eating his lunch with unfocused eyes. Klein carried his plate over, sat down, and greeted him. Talem turned his head and glanced at him. His lips quivered a few times, and after 3 or 4 seconds of silence, he finally opened his mouth and mumbled, "Sherlock, do you know rare people who have strange abilities and are very powerful?" "Yes, the one in front of you is one." Klein's eyebrows twitched. He didn't give a direct answer. "What do you want to do?" Talem opened his mouth but said nothing. With a solemn expression, he thought for a while before he squeezed out a smile and said, "It's nothing." I was just asking out of curiosity. He had asked what should a person do if he fell in love with someone he shouldn't have the last time, and this time he's asking if I know of anyone with strange abilities. Is he trying to get rid of the other party and completely sever his friend's fantasies? Who's worth the risk? Hiring a killer is equivalent to murder. Klein mumbled silently, cut a piece of the fish without any fine bones, and stuffed it into his mouth. Talon drew a breath, finished the food from his plate quickly, and wiped his mouth with a napkin. He seemed to return to normal as he said with a smile, "Mike wants to hire you for a few days to be his bodyguard." Mike Joseph, the reporter from the Daily Observer. I remember his performance at the Golden Rose was rather brilliant, Klein chuckled. What does Mike want to do now? Talon spread out his hands and said, I'm not sure. He just casually mentioned this matter. It seems to have something to do with an interview. He said that he will visit you the day after tomorrow. I hope you have the time to accept this commission. I can't be sure. Klein, who didn't know the details, didn't give an affirmative answer. At that moment, he heard a series of illusory pleas from a woman. Miss Magician, is she prepared to sacrifice the money in exchange for the formula? Klein picked up his speed and finished the rest of his food. Then he downed the black tea and went to the reception desk to get the attendant to open a lounge for him. After sealing the room with a wall of spirituality, he went above the gray fog and found that his judgment was correct. Miss Magician was requesting to hold the sacrificial ritual. The reason for her delay was that she only had £370 on her, and she had to go to the bank to withdraw some of her savings. After a series of maneuvering, she saw the £450 vanish into the illusionary door, and an additional formula appeared in her mind. Sequence 8, Trickmaster. Main ingredients: stomach pouch of a spirit eater, 20 ml of a deep-sea marlin's blood. Supplementary ingredients: 5 ml of essential oils made from hornbeam, 10 grams of string grass powder, a blossoming red chestnut flower, 80 ml of pure water. Finally, I've finally obtained it. It's been years. Forrest couldn't help pacing back and forth, feeling overjoyed and proud. Then, not feeling at ease, she took out a pen and a piece of paper, recording down the formula so that she wouldn't forget it and end up having to trouble Mr. Fool. If I don't meet someone who doesn't know the market well, then the main ingredient is at least £300, and I only have £430 left. I still need to work hard to earn more money. I'm going to write a new book. For suddenly felt that she was brimming with motivation. She was no longer the procrastinator she had been before. 5 minutes to 8 on a Wednesday evening, carrying all his savings, Klein entered the house where the gathering organized by Eye of Wisdom was held. He was wearing a black robe, with the hood over his face and an iron mask. £1,674 in cash and 5 gold coins. This is the new peak of my wealth. I wonder how much will remain after this gathering. Klein entered the living room and scanned the room with the help of the candle's flickering light. The apothecary didn't come. Is he caught up with something? Klein frowned slightly and sat in the same position as he did the previous time. After a few minutes, Eye of Wisdom clapped his hands and said, "Let's begin." Before he could finish his sentence, someone impatiently spoke up. It was the heavily shrouded lady who seemed to have an artisan backing her. She suppressed her voice and asked, "Is the friend who wanted to sell the briber formula last time here?" "I'm here," Klein answered simply. The lady heaved a sigh of relief, pushed her iron mask down and said, "This time there's a Beyonder weapon that you need. Of course, you can also choose cash." "What's the Beyonder weapon?" Klein suppressed the eagerness in his heart. The lady organized her words and said, "This is a whip woven from the feathers of the holy sunbird. You can usually disguise it as a belt. When used, it will be covered with pure holy flames of light. Any undead monsters that are whipped by it will suffer great damage, and the weaker ones would even be directly obliterated. It can also be used to soak in liquids to create sun holy water, but that would reduce the spirituality's durability. Every use will decrease its durability by a month. Currently, it has 13 months of effective durability. If you are willing, you can exchange it for the Briber formula without paying any additional cash. Holy Sunbird. It's not the sun divine bird. If it's the latter's feathers, I'll take it. Of course, only tail feathers would do. They can be used to concoct the Sequence 4's unshadowed potion. Klein was quite satisfied with the weapon itself, but the problem was that it could only be used for 13 months. Every time he made sun holy water, the durability would be reduced by a month. In time, he would have to replenish it with something similar. With this in mind, he turned to look at the seat of honor. Mr. Eye of Wisdom, can you describe in detail the brooch you introduced last time? Oh, write it down on paper and indicate the price that would satisfy you. He was afraid that the others would be interested in the brooch and thus raise the price, so he decided at the last second to get Eye of Wisdom to write it down. All right. Eye of Wisdom laughed and asked an attendant to bring him a pen and paper. While he was writing, the members of the gathering continued their trade. There were even some who were tempted as they asked about the price of the whip, only to receive an answer to wait. After a while, the Eye of Wisdom finished writing the introduction and passed it to Klein through the attendant. When Klein unrolled it, he saw that the words on the paper were written in print, preventing him from noticing anything special about them. Very careful, he started to read carefully. Sun brooch. It can also be called midsummer, and it is considered a relatively weaker grade 2 sealed artifact. With it acting as the center, it will fill a 10-meter radius with pure and warm energy. Normal people will not be able to sense it, but undead spirits and monsters will suffer constant damage, and they will quickly evaporate like a pool of water under a blazing fireball. Even wraiths and shadows will suffer the same fate, albeit lasting a little longer. In such an environment, the strength of powerful undead creatures will be significantly weakened. It will be very difficult for the wearer to be possessed or corrupted by evil spirits or monsters. Allows use of spells such as Holy Light Summoning, Holy Water Creation, Fire of Light, Cleave of Purification, Horror Immunity, Holy Oath, and Sun Halo. The downside is that, as long as you carry it, you will never be able to feel cool. You will always be experiencing a terrible heat. Young man, don't underestimate this state. The hot and irritated you will slowly step into the abyss of losing control. I will only sell it for £2,000. Don't try to bargain. As you know, I'm not too short of money and I'm a collector. It's much stronger than I imagined. Eye of Wisdom had been very vague the last time. Klein's heart skipped a beat. After a few seconds of thought, he looked over at the woman with the artisan backing her. £900 in cash. The average price for a Sequence 7 potion formula was around £800. Deal, the lady answered without hesitation. If I had known, I would have offered £1,000. Klein forced a smile. He was a man of his word, and without reneging his offer, he exchanged his prepared formula for £900 in cash. In an instant, his wealth soared to £2,574. It was enough to make a bachelor man live a pretty good life for the rest of his life. After Eye of Wisdom's appraisal, the lady looked at the formula once more in satisfaction. Sequence 7, Briber. Main ingredients: 1 weeping infant flower, strange-faced cannabis crystal. Supplementary ingredients: 5 drops of golden jimsonweed juice, 5 drops of black jimsonweed juice, 4 drops of fantasy grass essential oil, 80 ml of red wine. After completing the transaction, Klein drew a deep breath, looked at Eye of Wisdom and solemnly said, £2,000. I want that sun brooch. Eye of Wisdom chuckled and said, to be honest, I really don't wish to sell it, but since I have 2081, sun brooch isn't necessary to me. Besides, I have already named my price and reneging isn't my style. Wait 3 minutes for me. I'll get the sun brooch. All right, Klein replied, feeling both expectant and also feeling the pinch. At this point, the Beyonders in the activity room cast their gazes on him. A deal of £2,000 rarely appeared at this level of ordinary gatherings, perhaps not even once in a year or two. Klein could feel the greed and covetous feelings in their eyes. After a short silence, the transactions continued until Eye of Wisdom returned. In his open palm lay a dark golden brooch shaped like a sunbird. It was obvious that the Eye of Wisdom had some sweat on his face. 345 sun brooch, you can confirm it before you pay. The hooded Eye of Wisdom walked directly to Klein and handed the dark golden brooch to him. Very generous. Klein reached out to take it, but before he could examine it closely, he felt his surroundings become very hot. Even the wind felt as if it had been ignited. Once it entered his nose, it would spread to his lungs. At this moment, he seemed to have left the cold and humid backland, finding himself in the desert and wilderness, right in the middle of the northern continent. Hanging above him was the sun that radiated endless light and heat, and in his surroundings was the extremely dry and boundless yellow sand. Phew, it makes me want to eat ice cream. Sweat slowly seeped out of Klein's forehead, but under the iron mask, the liquid couldn't fall freely. It could only stick on the spot. Through direct contact, he could feel the pure and warm power radiating out, but the Beyonders around him were not affected in the slightest. After fixing the brooch in place, Klein released his spirituality and infused it into the dark golden surface. With a boom, he saw the sky filled with dancing dots of pure gold light as he received a great deal of information. This included how to use some of the spells in the sun domain with the help of the brooch. Most important of all were the tricks to injecting spirituality and the corresponding activation incantations. One of them included providing the brooch with 2 seconds of spirituality, allowing it to summon a holy beam of light that descended from the sky to purify the undead and inflict certain damage on other targets. A continuous supply of spirituality for 5 seconds, together with the use of the word sun in ancient Hermes, would create a small amount of sun-holy water, which would exorcise evil spirits, drive away the cold, and purify wraiths. In addition to the difference between strength and time intervals, the other corresponding spells could be cast as well. Fire of Light was a sacred, concentrated flame that suddenly appeared out of thin air via a mere thought. Cleave of Purification was an effective attack against wraiths, and it could also be used to augment bullets. Horror Immunity allowed the wearer to no longer feel fear. Holy Oath was used to temporarily strengthen one's strength, agility, fire damage, and holy damage via chanting the corresponding ancient Hermes term. Sun Halo targeted comrades who were within 20 meters of him. It could effectively boost their courage and purify the evil energies within their bodies. Not bad. Other than not being strange enough, it doesn't have too many flaws. It complements my magician abilities nicely. It's just a little hot. Klein's mind was filled with fantasies about himself in short-sleeved clothes. He rolled up his robe, took out a stack of bills from his inside pocket. Together with the £900 he had just received from the lady with the artisan backing her, he counted £2,000 in cash before handing it to Eye of Wisdom's attendant. After counting thrice and finally confirming that there was no mistake, Klein looked at his rapidly shrinking wallet, feeling both happy and sad at the same time. The money he had painstakingly saved had been reduced to £574 and 5 gold coins. However, he also obtained his second mystical item. The number of side effects was obviously fewer than the master key. It was a mystical item which was more outstanding, the sun brooch. The only drawback is it's just too hot. Klein reached out and touched his iron mask, and he nearly took it off to start using it to fan himself. With the reduction of his funds, Klein stopped considering the notion of purchasing anything else. He just sat there quietly, listening until the end of the gathering. Stimulated by the massive deal of £2,000, the gathering that night was relatively lively. For example, the whip woven from the feathers of the holy sunbird was sold for £850. Eye of Wisdom also made several purchases, buying an ancient book and a Beyonder ingredient. When the gathering ended, Eye of Wisdom surveyed the room and looked at Klein. He said with a chuckle, "You shall be the first to leave." "Is he afraid that someone will rob me?" Klein thanked him sincerely and walked out of the living room under the guidance of the attendant. He then impatiently took off his hooded robe and iron mask. He had already tried to use his spirituality to wrap and seal the sun brooch. It prevented it from constantly purifying the surroundings, and prevented its existence from being discovered by other Beyonders. However, the negative effects couldn't be weakened, unless it was not on his person. In order to ensure my mental health, I should only use it only when necessary. I can usually rely on purifying bullets and exorcism bullets. Klein left the gathering venue and took a long detour before arriving outside the Bravehearts bar. He entered, circled the area, and quickly came out again and hired a carriage. Unsurprisingly, he quickly saw a figure in a black regal dress outline itself opposite him. Sharon's appearance had not changed at all. She asked in an ethereal voice, "Are you done with your preparations?" "Yes, you can choose the ambush location and time. Notify me once you have confirmed the details." Klein nodded calmly. Sharon looked at him and said, "Okay." Seeing that she was about to disappear, Klein added, "Have Caspars prepare a box of explosives and bury them all over the planned battlefield." Sharon was silent for 2 seconds before she said, "Steve is also a demolition expert." "No, my main purpose is not to blast anyone apart." Klein smiled. "I just want to put on some fireworks." Sharon stared at him for a few seconds, then she nodded. Witnessing her figure fading rapidly, Klein leaned back against the wall and opened the window, letting the bone-piercing wind in, but he still felt hot. Back on Earth, I hated summer the most. I like ice pops, ice cream, cold drinks, watermelons." As he mumbled, Klein reached into his pocket and held the sun brooch. "This is a mystical item worth £2,000. Returning to Minsk Street, Klein walked slowly along the road lined with trees to Unit 15. When he passed Lawyer Jurgen's house, he subconsciously looked inside and saw the gas lamp with a slightly blue glow. "There's someone home." Klein laughed as he sighed, his forehead constantly beaded with sweat. Early the next day, on a Thursday morning, Klein had just come out of the bathroom with a newspaper in hand when he heard the doorbell ring. "Who is it?" "Right. Talem mentioned that reporter Mike Joseph will be coming to me today." Amid the tinkling bells, Klein came to the door and reached for the handle. The image of the visitor naturally appeared in his mind. He was about 30 years old, with a black tweed coat and a matching half-top hat. He had sparse eyebrows, charming blue eyes, and a handsome mustache, but his skin was rather rough. He was none other than the reporter from the Daily Observer, Mike Joseph. "Good morning, Mike. Talem told me about you." Klein opened the door and greeted him. He hadn't hesitated to throw the sun brooch above the gray fog. Mike Joseph pulled his bow tie and said, "Sorry for disturbing you so early, but I have matters to deal with later." "I understand," Klein said politely. "Have you had breakfast? Would you like to try my toast?" Mike suddenly smiled. "I'm so sorry, that would be so nice of you. If it's possible, could I also have a cup of hot coffee? Milk would do too. I noticed that you ordered fresh milk." "All right," Klein smiled in response. He busied himself with the toast, poured the milk, took out a tin of butter and sat down, eating without a word. Across from him, Mike was enjoying his breakfast without restraint, oblivious to the silence. "Phew," Klein exhaled and put down his cup. "Mike, you wanted to hire me to protect you." Mike set his knife and fork down slowly and took a mouthful of milk. Yes, about 2 days, Friday and Saturday, maybe even Sunday morning. Who wants to hurt you? Klein asked in deliberation. Mike chuckled and said, No, this is just a form of proactive self-protection. The editor of the newspaper arranged for me to do an investigation in East Borough, the dock area and the factory district. It said that it's sponsored by some church or aristocrat. As you know, gangs run rampant in East Borough. There are thugs everywhere, and there are people who are willing to betray their conscience just to scrounge a meal. I need a bodyguard who is good at fighting and shooting. And most private detectives have certain connections in East Borough, don't they? I don't. I rely on metaphysics to crack cases, no deduction. Klein thought for a moment and said, But I might not have the time in the next few days. I have to see when Miss Sharon will be taking action. Mike cleared his throat and said, I've already applied for £10. This protection mission will amount to £10 even if nothing happens. Klein let out a soft chuckle. Mike, I'm serious. Tomorrow at this time, come after breakfast to look for me. If I have availed myself, I will take this commission. If I'm really busy, then I will introduce you to other detectives. They're also good at fighting and shooting. For example, Stewart or Caslana, two names flashed through his mind. Mike finished the remaining toast and said, That wouldn't be an issue. After breakfast, Klein watched the journalist leave his home and admired the sights of the freezing rain outside through the oriel window, the passing carriages and pedestrians, the dark sky, and the colorful umbrellas. Finally, a normal mission. It neither involves Beyonders nor does it have anything to do with finding cats and catching adulterers. It's a pity that it isn't a commission regarding a murder case or something like that. Otherwise, I would be able to experience what it feels like to be a true detective. There is always only one truth. Klein's thoughts wandered aimlessly as he felt an inexplicable sense of carefreeness. If not for the fact that he was still worried about the situation regarding Sharon and Marek, he planned to relax completely, visit all kinds of museums, buy a ticket to a large theater, listen to a few operas and musicals, and enjoy the delicacies of the various nations that had gathered in Backland City. Well, I'm a casual tourist, a lonely gourmet. Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh, turned around and walked towards the sofa, intending to look through the newspapers he hadn't finished reading. Suddenly, he noticed that a slip of paper had appeared on the coffee table. The handwriting was elegant and reserved. Tonight at 10 o'clock. We'll meet at the back door of Braveheart's bar. Klein was stunned for a moment. He turned his head to look outside the window, sighed, and said, Is it finally starting? A catchphrase from Detective Conan. 346. A magician before going on stage 10 o'clock at night, in the alley by the back door of the Braveheart's bar. Like the previous time, Klein, in his black double-breasted frock coat and matching half-top hat, had merely circled the bar once before he walked to the nearest street as though he were on a stroll. Just as he walked out of the alley, a carriage stopped in front of him. Behind the glass window was Marek's pair of brown eyes, which were still suppressing any signs of malicious intent. Klein pressed the top of his half-top hat and, holding the sturdy cane in his hand, calmly boarded the carriage as if he had hailed it himself. He sat down and straightened his bow tie like a gentleman attending a banquet. That outfit isn't suitable for battle. Marek, who was wearing a white shirt, black vest, and tights, sized him up a few times and frowned. It was obvious that he still had some doubts regarding Klein's strength, but he had chosen to trust Sharon. Klein smiled casually and said, My Beyonder powers are different from yours. Our fighting styles are different too. This type of clothing will not affect me negatively in any way. It even suits me very well. For example, it has a lot of pockets, and they can be used to store different items in different places, so as to avoid taking the wrong things when in a hurry and losing my life through such a laughable mistake. As he spoke, he took out the remaining 3 sedatives from a sewn concealed pocket. They were the special sedatives concocted by the apothecary. Just as he finished his sentence, a figure quickly outlined itself on a window of the carriage. A figure wearing a long black regal dress and a small soft hat. It was none other than the Sequence 5 Beyonder of the mutant pathway, Wraith Sharon. "You explain too much." Sharon looked at Klein and said in an ethereal tone, "Not natural enough." "I just wanted to get into the act." Klein laughed dryly and replied, "Probably it's because I'm a bit nervous." Without waiting for Sharon to speak again, he handed the 3 sedatives to Marek. "Find a chance to drink it yourself. I'm sure that you're more experienced than I am. You won't drink it too early or too late, much less drink too little or too much." Marek looked at the sealed and transparent glass test tube, gently shaking the liquid inside, and said, 2.5. Any more and I will really be sedated. I wouldn't do anything for a short period of time. "Very good," Klein praised and turned to look at Sharon. "Have you guys decided on the ambush spot?" Sharon nodded. "We're on the way there." She didn't directly reveal the intended location to Klein. Very prudent, very careful. Klein thought for a moment before asking, "Will you be hurt by purification?" "As a zombie, yes. Same when I'm in my spirit state," Sharon explained succinctly. "In other words, when a Sequence 5 Wraith is still in their physical state, the purification effects wouldn't be effective." Klein thoughtfully asked, "What about exorcism? What about demon hunting?" As they were dealing with a Beyonder of the same pathway, Sharon didn't hide anything from him. "Demon hunting will deal damage to our bodies. Likewise for exorcism, to both our bodies and spiritual bodies, but it wouldn't be fatal." Klein curled his lips into a smile and exhaled. "I understand." He pondered for a moment, and he asked again after some deliberation, "Do you feel the power of purification and exorcism now?" "No," Marek replied hoarsely. "Very good. This spirituality cage, modified from a wall of spirituality, is indeed able to isolate the effects of the sun brooch. However, I'm so hot." Klein secretly sighed and confirmed, "Wraith Steve, Zombie Jason, and Werewolf Tyre, do they have any other mystical items or Beyonder weapons besides the Scarlet Lunar Corona?" "We don't know." Marek pinched his glabella, looking a bit irritated. With the battle at hand, he couldn't help but be stirred by these emotions while suppressing his maliciousness and desires. Sharon listened silently and replied without any hints of discomposure, "When influenced by the Scarlet Lunar Corona, Jason and Tyre will be in a rather fervent state. Even if they have mystical items, they would lack the reason to use them." "Unless it's something passive," added Marek. "But to a werewolf, their claws are their Beyonder weapons. It's the same for me, Tyre, and Jason. It can tear through steel and comes with venom." Klein's eyes darted about as he nodded. "All right, I have no more questions." In the night, with few pedestrians, the carriage sped across the streets, its wheels going over puddles of water from time to time, splattering fine dirt onto itself. After 10 minutes or so, Marek had the zombie driver stop the carriage. Klein looked out through the glass window and saw a dark, dilapidated building. Not far away, the sound of running water could be heard. "This is the West Balham dock that has been abandoned for a year and is about to be rebuilt. Our planned ambush point will be around its warehouses," Marek introduced. "The abandoned West Balham dock. If an accident were to really happen, the Tussock River would be the best escape route. According to my previous survey, there is a Lever Cathedral about 2 kilometers northwest of here, one belonging to the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery." Klein quickly recalled his surroundings. He disembarked from the carriage, tidied up his clothes in a leisurely manner, and with his cane in hand, followed Sharon and Marek into the dock which awaited renovations. After walking for about 5 minutes, they came to an open space surrounded by several warehouses. The soil here was dark brown with withered weeds lying everywhere. A wooden chest quietly sat in a dark corner. "Those are the explosives you asked for," Marek pointed. Klein immediately nodded and said, "Aren't you afraid that a tramp might steal them? My zombies are sleeping underground here. If anyone enters, they will scare that person away. Marek pointed to a few other spots. Avoid them when you bury the explosives. No problem. Klein smiled and nodded before asking, will my purification and exorcism effects hurt your guys? No, they are equivalent to corpses when in deep slumber, and there's also a thick layer of soil shielding them. Marek gave an affirmative answer. After looking around, Sharon became talkative for once. Stay here and make your preparations. We'll go and lure the enemy over. It won't take more than 30 minutes. Please make use of the time. After you finish your preparations, hide in a warehouse. Don't be in a hurry to make your move. Make sure to be patient. No matter how dangerous the situation is, treat it as normal. When I become weak and the scarlet lunar corona appears, you can use that eye to search for Steve and launch a sudden attack on him. I will also use my mystical item to complement you. Klein listened attentively, chuckled, and said, a very simple plan. The simpler the plan, the more effective it is, Sharon calmly responded. Marek pinched his forehead, shook his head, and said, Steve isn't a fool. If any problem arises in a complicated plan, it will lead to a complete disaster. After they finished their exchange, Sharon vanished and Marek quickly departed from the dock. After watching them leave, Klein took out a small square metal box from his pocket. Its surface was covered in a thin film of spirituality. This was the spirituality cage that had been modified from a wall of spirituality. It could, to some extent, isolate the outside world from the effects of certain mystical items, but it couldn't abate the negative effects they had on the possessor. Of course, sealed artifacts which were too powerful or too strange were definitely not something that a spirituality cage could deal with. They required a special sealing environment that was specially designed for it. 4 warehouses overgrown with weeds. The ground is muddy from the rain earlier. Klein took out a piece of paper and shook it. Pa! The paper quickly became taut and as hard as an iron plate. Klein held the note and dug a shallow hole in the middle of the open ground. He buried the small square iron box in his hand. There was only a thin layer of soil between it and the outside world. Next, he took out the explosives from the wooden box and buried them in different corners and in different warehouses. He buried the remaining explosive sticks near the center. After finishing all of this, he took out his revolver and adjusted the ratio of the bullets, again 3 purifying bullets and 2 exorcism bullets. Putting away the revolver in his underarm holster, Klein tidied his clothes, walked to a gap between 2 warehouses, and threw a paper figurine there, right above some buried explosives. He examined his surroundings again, and then he took out another square metal box. He removed the spirituality cage on its surface and took out the dark golden sunbird-shaped brooch, solemnly wearing it on his left chest. Phew! Klein let out a breath, left the place, circled the exterior, threw out some inconspicuous items, and burned away the used piece of paper. When he returned, he climbed to the top of one of the warehouses and hid in the shadows. Reaching out his hand, he counted and confirmed the various charms, extract, and herbal powders. He touched the iron cigarette case and snapped his fingers. The paper figurine he had left between the 2 warehouses stood up and transformed into a gentleman wearing a black double-breasted frock coat, a silk half-top hat, and was holding a hard cane. The gentleman's position was rather remote and hidden, making it difficult for anyone who came in from the outside to notice him. With his stand-in present, Klein's figure disappeared from where he stood. However, his vision wasn't affected in any way, and he could clearly see the road that led to the clearing. Even though he had made preparations and had experienced many battles, Klein was still a bit afraid and nervous at that very moment. No matter how good a performance was, it could still be seen through. Furthermore, the enemy was a Sequence 5 wielding a mystical item. There was also a Sequence 6 and Sequence 7. Is this the state every magician is in before he goes on stage? Klein took a silent breath, suppressing his emotions and the heat of his body. That night, the crimson moon was constantly obscured by the clouds, and there was only a glimmer of light in the clearing. Before long, Klein saw three figures rapidly approaching. One in front, one in the middle, and one at the back. Thank you for listening to the story on KevinAudio.com. 347 Zombie and Werewolf. Running ahead of the group was Marek. His disheveled hair was completely blown back by the wind, and his expression was twisted and hideous. He was even faster than a steam locomotive at its peak speed. With a whoosh, he arrived at the entrance to the clearing. But even so, he was still unable to escape from his pursuers. The closest figure to him was a man who had the same pale complexion as himself, with indistinct dark patches on his face, as if they were healing marks from rotting wounds. The malice in his eyes was completely undisguised and unrestrained. He looked more like a zombie who was craving fresh flesh rather than a human being, and Klein guessed that he was Jason, a Sequence 6. The distance between Jason and Marek remained within 7 or 8 meters, sometimes lengthening, sometimes shortening. This repeated again and again as they ventured back and forth. More than 10 meters behind them, a figure was left far behind. It was a thin but muscular man. His hair was shaved very short and his hair stood erect like spikes. As he swung his arms, the tip of his palms flashed with a metallic light, reflecting the weak crimson moonlight. Those were black fingernails which were as long as daggers. Werewolf Tyre, Klein chanted the person's sequence and name silently. In his mind, the wall that was splashed with blood appeared in his mind. It was a scene with intestines and limbs splattered all over the ground. Tap, tap, tap. Marek used all his strength as he ran, while Jason gritted his teeth and ran as fast as he could. At some point, the healed dark spots on his face began to swell, as if some sort of rotten liquid was about to ooze out. The two of them left the puddles of water and moist soil that were turning into white frost in their wake. The withered weeds were lifted up by the wind created by the two of them. As they slowly fell down, they began to rot and decay at a speed visible to the naked eye. Suddenly, a pale hand reached out of the frosted soil and accurately grabbed Jason's ankle. Pa! Jason twisted his body and forcefully kicked out, breaking the hand's wrist and sending it flying. The remaining stump's flesh and blood had long since rotten and white maggots struggled to squirm outwards. Marek stopped, pinched his lips with his right hand and let out a shrill whistle. Bang! 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 The soil in different parts of the clearing were lifted, and the expressionless corpses sat up. At the same time, a chilly wind suddenly swirled. Countless transparent shadows seemed to have caught the scent of a bloody feast, and none of them wanted to fall behind as they rushed towards Jason. Some pulled his arms, some pulled his calves, and some even hugged his head. Jason stopped and grunted. The shadows flew out. One after another, some of them screamed miserably and disappeared, while others stayed in their original spots, lost. At almost the same time, Marek and Jason both raised their right hands, thumbs held up beside their forefingers, with their index fingers aiming at each other. Silently, the air between them exploded as black wisps of air billowed upwards. Marek took a step back, and a few strands of his disheveled hair withered in a blink of an eye and fluttered to the ground. Marek, you're still so weak. You still don't understand how to use the power of desire, Jason said with a low, hoarse laugh. At this moment, Werewolf Tyre had already arrived at his side. As for Steve, the Sequence 5 Beyonder in charge of the operation, was nowhere to be found. Don't be in such a hurry to finish off Marek. Wait for Sharon to come and save him. Lord Steve is about to arrive, Werewolf Tyre whispered to Jason. He then extended his bright red tongue and licked his lips. I wonder what Sharon will look like when she has her clothes off. Before he could finish his sentence, he suddenly saw Jason turn his head. His face was deathly pale and there were two identical figures in his eyes. Black regal dress, Light blonde hair, exquisite face, and pale skin. Pa, he struck out with both palms and gripped Werewolf Tyre's neck. The creaking sound of bones giving way sounded out. Wraith Sharon had attacked. Tyre inhaled sharply, making his neck bulge like a water pipe. It grew strands of stiff black hair, and briefly resisted the force that would snap his windpipe and neck. His eyes gradually rolled backward, showing its whites as his red tongue hung out and sticky saliva drooled down his lips. However, his right hand had accurately reached into his pocket. He had cracked a preset spirituality seal. The empty clearing, together with the warehouses, suddenly lit up as crimson moonlight filled the entire area. Jason's grip on Werewolf Tyre's neck began to weaken, and a figure in a small, soft hat appeared behind him. Tyre's face broke into a smile that was both smug and cruel. His right hand took out a miniature full moon from his pocket, a crimson full moon. It was a dark red accessory that constantly emitted a serene luster. Shaped like a full moon, it had crimson rubies embedded along its circumference. In the middle was a symbol that symbolized the moon, as well as many other mysterious labels. Sharon narrowed her eyes instinctively and retreated 2 steps back. Her incorporeality slowly receded. Her legs no longer seemed capable of supporting her weight. She fell limply to the ground, her black and complicated regal dress stained with dust and mud. Werewolf Tyre raised the palm-sized round accessory high up into the air, laughing as he gasped for breath. Lord Steve was right. You would definitely attempt to counterattack. And Sharon, your target for possession would definitely be Jason, whose sequence is higher than mine. Therefore, the Scarlet Lunar Corona was given to me. Guess, where is he now? This isn't as Sharon had expected. It seems like I can only choose the best opportunity to strike myself. Klein frowned as he heard this, and he forcefully suppressed the anxiety in his heart. At this point, Werewolf Tyre was in no hurry to attack. He knew that the longer the effects of the Scarlet Lunar Corona lasted, the weaker Sharon would become, and the more Marek would be in pain. In Jason's cold eyes, which usually had a hint of savagery and madness, there was no longer any rationality in them left. He was also affected by the Scarlet Lunar Corona, but he was used to indulging in his desires, so he didn't feel any pain. Instead, he felt a thirst for the fresh flesh before his eyes. Gasp. Jason let out a low, inhuman growl from his throat. His exposed skin and hair turned white. At that moment, Sharon raised her arms with difficulty and used her left hand to remove the black glove that she wore on her right palm. Jason happened to lunge at her, and a thin layer of ice covered the soil around her. Suddenly, endless rays of light burst forth from Sharon's palm. As they fed on Sharon's spirituality, they interweaved in front of the doll-like lady to form a bronze door, which was covered with mysterious patterns and filled with an indescribable smell. The door swung open with a creak and a crack appeared. From the crack, pairs of pale or transparent hands or arms covered in teeth or bloody, skinless arms, stretched out, crossed the void and grabbed zombie Jason. Indescribable pairs of eyes were hidden in the darkness behind the door, quietly watching the prey in front of them. Before he could even react, Jason was grabbed by the arms, and he was entangled by smooth and incorporeal tentacles. These tentacles were dark green vines that had countless baby faces protruding out. These strange entities were crying and laughing as they tried to drag zombie Jason behind the door. Even though his thoughts were completely controlled by his bloodlust and the urge to kill, Jason instinctively felt afraid. Gasp! The sound from his throat suddenly intensified, and layers of frost immediately appeared on the worrisome-looking arm. The dark green vines that protruded from the babies' faces emitted painful groans as they continuously dripped with decayed, turbid yellow liquid. The pulling force abated, but it did not disappear. Jason kept directing ghosts to interfere, but it was like throwing a stone into the sea. Even when he tried to use spells from Death's domain, they failed to deliver any striking results. His body began moving uncontrollably towards the crack of the illusory, mysterious door. Occasionally, he would manage to struggle and retreat a little. As he had taken a sedative in advance, Marek was not completely taken down by the pain. Taking advantage of this, he took out the last 2 sedatives, broke the bottle with a snap, and drank 1.5 glasses in one go. The suppressed malice in his eyes weakened, and his twisted expression returned to normal. He swept his gaze at Werewolf Tyre. At the same time, with a swoosh, Tyre's thin but muscular body disappeared and reappeared more than 10 meters away. As his figure began outlining itself, an illusory image was left behind. A black aura that seemed to be alive rose up from the ground, pierced through the remnant images, and disappeared with a flicker. Tyre hadn't used Blink, as his sequence didn't have the corresponding Beyonder powers to do so. He had relied on the scarlet lunar corona to push him to his maximum speed. The speed at which he moved at produced afterimages. At that moment, Klein, who was hiding in the shadows at the top of the warehouse, also reached into his pocket with his left hand, touching the iron cigarette case. He removed its surface spirituality cage and gently opened the case. He was sure that Wraith Steve had already arrived at the scene. Otherwise, Jason definitely would have been dragged behind the terrible door if the deadlock continued. As for Werewolf Tyre, despite being augmented by the scarlet lunar corona, he was unable to instantly finish Marek off. When Sharon aimed the door of mysteries at the werewolf, the scarlet lunar corona would end up changing owners. As soon as Klein's fingers touched the all-black eye inside the metal cigarette case, his mind filled with crazy, foul, and terrifying ravings. There were terrifying ravings that made his blood vessels bulge. He felt as though his eyes were cracking and his head could explode at any moment. And in the midst of these ravings, Klein saw strange, mysterious, and illusory black threads. They were divided into groups, some of them extending to Sharon's body, some of them from Werewolf Tyre. They intertwined with each other without entangling themselves as they extended into the void. Among them, many of the black lines came from a spot not far away from Marek, and they didn't overlap. Wraith Steve. He wants to possess Marek. With a thought, Klein retracted his left hand. Instead of drawing his gun to shoot, he snapped his fingers without making much of a sound. Boom! An explosion suddenly occurred between the 2 warehouses. The raging flames and heat caused a figure wearing a black, double-breasted frock coat to float out. After catching the attention of the others, Klein quickly drew his gun and pulled the trigger at the spot he remembered. At the same time, the dark golden sunbird brooch on his chest flashed with a ray of light. He added cleave of purification to the purifying bullet. Bang! The bullet shot out with a faint golden beam of light. 348 terrifying wraith, a faint golden stream of light flashed past, hitting what seemed like an empty space. However, resplendent flames suddenly rose up from that spot, rapidly forming a silhouette who was wearing a black tuxedo and a dark red cloak. The figure's left arm was burning with holy and pure flames as it continuously emitted faint black and green smoke, illuminating his pale face in dark green glow. It was a man in his 40s with oily hair that was neatly combed with meticulous attention. His eyes were dark and green, and while possessing no emotion, there were no signs of pain. Wraith Steve. He turned his head and looked maliciously at Klein, who was at the top of the warehouse. Klein was startled as he felt his body suddenly turn cold. Even the heat brought by the sun brooch couldn't counteract it. His body stiffened quickly and his eyes glazed over. His pupils reflected the same 2 figures, a black tuxedo, a dark red cloak, a head of hair slathered with oil, a pair of dark green eyes, and the pale face of a man in his 40s. Almost in an instant, Klein was placed under Steve's control, his thoughts gradually numbing. This was the ability of a Sequence 5 Wraith. It was a strange and hardly defensible ability. Fortunately, he was adequately aware of everything beforehand and was already prepared for it. Moreover, the exorcism effect could effectively resist the possession of evil spiritual beings, so before his ability to think had completely disappeared, he stimulated the spirituality of his spirit body and injected it into the dark golden sunbird brooch. Just as he was about to raise his hand to grab hold of his neck, a warm and pure ray of light suddenly descended from the sky. It was like a pillar of light from the sun, bringing with it a feeling of brilliance and holy purification as it enveloped Klein within. It was a spell from the sun domain holy light summoning. Amidst the holy light, the formless possession ability was weakened, and Klein's eyes suddenly regained their luster. In close succession, his body ignited, becoming brittle and charred, leaving behind a thin piece of paper. At the same time, between the gaps of the two warehouses, Klein, in his double-breasted frock coat and matching silk half-top hat, jumped out of the roaring flames from the previous explosion. His cane had been thrown away somewhere long ago, and the same figure floating above his head had also been successfully destroyed by the flames. It turned into pieces of ashes and scattered in every direction. Before Klein could confirm his situation, he felt an invisible grip on his ankle. There was a firm grip on his calves, arms, chest, and clothes. In his spirit vision, which had long been activated, Klein saw blurry, transparent figures. Some of them were incomplete, some were covered in blood, some of them had burnt black skin, and others were pale and cold. Phew! A cold wind of unknown origins blew at his neck, making his hair stand on end and made his body tremble uncontrollably. The dark golden sunbird brooch in front of him suddenly flashed with a brilliant light, and golden illusory flames started flaring up around him one after another. These flames emitted the aura of the sun, and because they were so dense, they formed a sea. This was the fire of light from the sun domain. The ghastly ghosts around Klein shrieked silently and vanished, and the cold wind at the back of his head was replaced by the scorching heat of the sun brooch. Klein, who was temporarily safe in this environment, couldn't help but sigh in fear. Even though he had prepared ahead of time and had obtained items to counter his opponent, a one-on-one battle with a Sequence 5 Wraith was still precarious. The performance had almost ended in failure from the very beginning. Not too far away from Marek, the dark red-cloaked Steve's figure turned slightly incorporeal. The bright flames on his left arm were quickly extinguished under the onslaught of the black aura. His eyes shone with dark green light, filled with malice and desire. He seemed to have lost his mind and ability to think. At this moment, with the shot's warning, Marek had distanced himself and directed the numb-faced zombies who had crawled out of the earth to surround Werewolf Tyre. He created slippery layers of ice and rotting sludge in an attempt to affect his enemy's movements. Werewolf Tyre held onto the tiny full moon that was emitting crimson light as he ran without stopping. When he was blocked by a zombie, he casually swiped down. Whoosh! The zombie was immediately split into 6 pieces. The long, rotten flesh and wriggling maggots sprinkled all over the ground. Werewolf Tyre froze for a moment, looking at his claws in disbelief. Only then did he understand that the augmentation that the scarlet lunar corona brought him wasn't only restricted to speed. He felt that he had mastered some powerful and strange spell. Tyre stopped running and turned to face the pale Marek. At this moment, Zombie Jason was drawing closer to the illusory but mysterious door. His body was covered with dark green vines that had protruded from the faces of the babies. He was being dragged by arms that were either full of teeth or were skinless. His eyes were almost touching the crack of the bronze door as he stared coldly at the indescribable eyes hidden in the darkness. It was as if that place was the final resting place for his heart. No, His body, which was controlled by bloodlust and the desire to kill, shouted out shrilly. Werewolf Tyre, who was about to counterattack, stopped instantaneously. Clenching his teeth, he threw the miniature version of the Crimson Full Moon at Steve. Only by allowing a Sequence 5 Beyonder to regain his strength would he be augmented, allowing the battle to come to a quick end. Only then would Jason have a chance of being rescued. Upon seeing this, Klein's eyes lit up, and he immediately snapped his fingers. Boom! In the scarlet lunar corona's trajectory, a pre-buried explosive threw up the soil, blew out a strong, impactful gust of wind, and set off a scarlet flame. Being struck by this, the scarlet lunar corona was redirected and landed in another direction. Boom! Another explosive blew up, inducing a fiery light to rise up. Klein leaped up and pounced at the scarlet lunar corona, which wasn't too far from him. Suddenly, a pale palm appeared right in front of the scarlet lunar corona's landing spot and grabbed it. It was none other than Steve, who had disappeared and then reappeared. His instincts made him chase after the full moon. With a soft sound, Steve grabbed the scarlet lunar corona. His dark green eyes, which were full of malice and desire, gained a trace of spiritual luster. This caused him to return from the form of a pure wraith to a Sequence 5 powerhouse. He smirked at Klein. He wasn't in a hurry to deal with this weak opponent, so he let his figure disappear once more. Klein, who had already thrown himself out, rolled twice, reached into his pocket with his left hand, and once again gently flipped open the iron cigarette case. He touched Risego's all-black eye. Amidst the ravings that caused his tears and snot to constantly flow, Klein saw more strange black lines, and from their origin he caught a glimpse of the invisible Steve. He was closing in on Sharon, who was slumped to the ground weakly at high speeds. He wanted to control her, rescue Jason, and put an end to the battle. Sharon was their main target for this operation. Klein suddenly retracted his left hand, and with a thought, he once again injected his spirituality into the sun brooch. 2, 1. A holy beam of light descended from the sky, enveloping Sharon from behind. Steve, who was wearing a dark red cloak, suddenly appeared a few meters away, barely avoiding the holy light. With the augmentation of the scarlet lunar corona, his speed was already frightening to the point of him being capable of effectively dodging in an instant. But at the same time, the genuflecting Klein had raised his right hand and pulled the trigger of the revolver. His target was Jason. A resplendent bullet flew out, aimed directly at Jason's back, and was about to help him enter the bronze door of mystery. But at that moment, Steve disappeared and reappeared behind Jason, blocking the bullet with his open left palm. Sizzle! The sunlight from the explosion made him shake his arm in pain. He narrowed his eyes as his skin was constantly charring and peeling, but it quickly healed. Suddenly, he heard a crisp sound. Klein had snapped his fingers again. Boom! A nearby explosive exploded. The resulting shock wave and bullet-like stones shot out in all directions. A large number of them landed on Jason's and Steve's bodies. No! With a blood-curdling scream, the clothes on Jason's side tore apart, and the quickly darkening white spots on his skin appeared as if fresh blood was about to seep out. To a zombie with a body as hard as steel, this wasn't an effective injury, but to a person like Jason who was struggling to hold on, it was equivalent to the beckoning of death. He could no longer hold on as those terrifying arms quickly pulled him into the crack of the bronze door. No! Jason's scream resounded into the distance as the mysterious and illusory door closed with a clang, devouring the rest of his screams and isolating it from the world. The clearing in the middle of the warehouses turned completely silent. Jason had completely disappeared, as though he had never been born into this world. Steve's eyes widened and he opened his mouth, letting out an angry screech, "Damn it!" Bam! As his voice resounded, Klein felt as if someone had heavily hammered him in the head. His vision turned blurry, and whatever he breathed in smelled of blood. His vision had become blood-red. For a short time, his ears were filled with buzzing sounds, and he couldn't hear anything else. After Tyre delivered the scarlet lunar corona, he had grown black fur and sharp fangs. He was no longer immune to its effects and painfully covered his ears. Blood even flowed out from the corner of his eyes and mouth. Marek, who should have seized the opportunity to grab him, was in an even worse state. His desire and malice, which had been suppressed by the sedative, had reared their heads once more, causing him to almost lose control of his zombies. His expression was extremely twisted. 349 poison bottle due to Wraith Steve's shriek. The weakened Miss Sharon also revealed a painful expression. However, she still managed to close her palm with much difficulty, causing the rays of light to be severed, which caused the illusory, mysterious bronze door to disappear. Klein knew that the situation was turning bad. Enduring his headache, he quickly took a step back and entered the fire. His figure quickly disappeared and reappeared in another explosion that happened in a different direction. He had just jumped out in an attempt to strike back when he saw Steve, the middle-aged man with the dark red cloak, stop in his tracks instead of chasing after him, as though he was waiting for something. Klein suddenly felt agitated. His head felt dizzy and his stomach spasmed. He quickly weakened, but he had no idea why. Marek, who had just recovered from the sharp shriek, also had an abnormal reaction. He constantly stretched out his hands to grab at himself, as if his body suffered an uncontrollable itch. He gasped for breath as he used his long, sharp nails to rip apart his clothes and left white streaks across his body. The more he scratched, the deeper it became, causing its redness to seep out. Sharon fell to the ground, but she couldn't stand again. Her blue eyes lost their focus, as though she couldn't see anything. "Poison," she whispered the word. Not far from her, Steve looked at her tightly clenched fist. He seemed rather fearful of the bronze door that was covered with mysterious patterns and an indescribable smell. He didn't dare to recklessly make a move. In his right hand, he held the scarlet lunar corona, the crimson full moon that was releasing a cold glow. Using his left hand, he took out a brown, translucent glass bottle from his pocket, and he snorted. Biological poison bottle can be used to randomly create different kinds of toxins. As long as you open it, the poisons will gradually spread to its surroundings. It will be effective in less than a minute, and the symptoms will only become worse. In 4 minutes, if you don't leave the poison-filled environment, then the corresponding effects will be unpreventable, such as death. What a pity. I thought Jason would be able to hold on to this moment. Sharon, you wouldn't have been affected since a spirit body isn't afraid of poison, but unfortunately, there's the scarlet lunar corona here, which prevents you from switching states. Perhaps you can give up resisting and let me understand your hidden charms. He appeared to be leisurely introducing the abilities of the mystical item in his hand, as though he wanted to wait for Klein and company to completely lose their ability to resist before attacking. However, Tyre didn't understand his intention. Under the influence of the scarlet lunar corona, the irrational werewolf started his counterattack without hesitation. He threw himself forward, flailed his claws, and swiped across Marek's body, tearing it apart. Clang, clang, clang. The sound of nails tearing through steel sounded in succession, and Marek's skin finally showed signs of bloody wounds. Klein pinched his forehead. It felt like his forehead was starting to heat up, but the negative effects weren't as bad as what Steve mentioned. It seems like the poison has been weakened by the sun broach's constant purification and purging effect. Klein suddenly sneered. "Are you planning on attacking us after we succumb to the poison? Why do you think I didn't use fireworks just now? Why do you think I relied on explosives? With so many explosions, I've definitely attracted the attention of others. The official Beyonders nearby are rushing here at this very moment. You don't have much time left. Steve turned his head to look at Klein, whose face couldn't be identified thanks to the paint that was smeared on it. He suddenly laughed and said, "I forgot there's a bug that I can easily deal with. Don't worry, you'll definitely be dead before the people from the church arrive." Before he could finish his sentence, Klein suddenly raised the revolver in his right hand and shot out a purifying bullet. Steve moved his footsteps slightly, traversing several meters in turn. Along the way, he left afterimages behind. However, Klein's bullet didn't hit where he had aimed. Instead, it hit the middle of the clearing, piercing through the soil and creating a loud commotion. A breeze of spirituality blew past, and both Marek's zombie and Steve's shadows stopped moving at the same time. In a split second, they charged out rapidly, charging towards the center of the clearing like a pack of hungry dogs at mealtime. Steve, who was about to use arcane methods to control Klein and easily kill him, was stunned for a moment. Then, he revealed a puzzled and surprised expression. For some baffling reason, he discovered that he couldn't command the undead he controlled. It was a first for him. At the same time, Klein snapped his fingers, detonating a few more bombs and setting off scarlet flames that soared into the air in different locations. His figure leaped from one bonfire to the other as he blinked towards the clearing's exterior. "You want to run," Steve whispered. Just as he was about to turn incorporeal to chase after his target, he found that the zombies and shadows had dug out a square metal box and were fighting for the item inside. Soon, one of Shadow succeeded. Its body swelled, and seemingly gaining intelligence, it flew in another direction. "So that item is used to delay my actions and allow him to successfully escape. Humph. He still doesn't understand what a wraith and the scarlet lunar corona is capable of." Steve temporarily gave up on chasing Klein. Putting away the biological poison bottle, his body suddenly disappeared and appeared on a thin layer of ice that formed in a puddle of water. He relied on his terrifying speed to drag out an afterimage and arrived behind that giant shadow. Steve's eyes flashed with a dark green light. The shadow instantly dispersed without a sound, and the item in its hand dropped. The other zombies and shadows, completely disregarding the oppressive aura of the mighty existence as they rushed over to grab it. Steve was more and more alarmed and curious. He discovered that his spiritual intuition couldn't draw any revelations from the object that had caused the rioting of the zombies and shadows. He stepped forward and grabbed the object with his left hand. It was a dark gold key ring. Hanging from it was an ancient and exquisite copper whistle. Beside the copper whistle hung a simple bronze key. They clung closely together as they remained in Steve's pale palm. At the same time, Steve's scarlet lunar corona in his right hand was quietly emanating a crimson glow, like a miniature full moon. Before thoughts even surfaced in Steve's mind, a faint but very strange sound entered his mind, ripping at his nerves and scraping his scalp. "Ah!" Steve let out a miserable scream and fell from midair to the ground. The scarlet lunar corona, which he held in his hand, and the key ring with the copper whistle and key were sent flying at the same time. He struggled and twisted on the spot, his body bulging and protruding. There were arms that were as small as babies which grew out of his body, or a foul, light yellow liquid that sloshed inside his body. At this moment, a flame ignited again. Klein, who had escaped, leaped out and appeared in the path of the scarlet lunar corona. He didn't attempt to catch the mystical item. Instead, with a gentle flick, he diverted its trajectory, sending it flying toward the weakened Miss Sharon. Steve's cries of pain gradually died down, and the scarlet lunar corona accurately landed on Sharon. Sharon's figure instantly turned incorporeal, and the blue eyes that had lost their focus regained their luster. Clenching her right hand tightly, her left hand held the palm-sized accessory inlaid with a ring of dark rubies. Her body began to float. The scarlet lunar corona allowed its wielder to be immune to the influence of the full moon. Sharon was no longer weak. And in her spirit-body state, she wasn't afraid of the biological poison. At this moment, the zombies and shadows gathered together once again, fighting over the chained master key and Azek's copper whistle. Klein didn't care. He raised his left arm and pointed. The sun brooch on his chest flashed a dark golden glow and disappeared. An intense, bright, and holy light fell from the sky, shrouding the group of zombies and shadows that were fighting over it. In what seemed like daylight, the transparent and bizarre shadows quickly melted and disappeared. The pale and stinking corpses emitted black smoke first before they ignited and burned like candles. By the time the light disappeared, there was almost nothing left except for Azek's ancient and intricate copper whistle and the master key, which were both strung on an already blackened key ring. They lay there silently. Meanwhile, Sharon didn't care about Marek, whose injuries were turning graver thanks to Tyre's attacks. Instead, she relied on her own ability to phase into mirror-like items to reach the thin piece of ice that Steve had previously used and stepped out. She stretched out her right hand towards Steve, who was transforming into a monster, and opened it wide, aiming the palm of her hand at the enemy. Endless rays of light burst out and quickly intertwined to form the mysterious patterned bronze door. Creak. With a jarring noise, the small black hat on Sharon's head was blown away by a sudden gust of wind, and her carefully combed blonde hair cascaded down in a disheveled state. It was obvious that using the mystical item again was rather taxing on her. Creak. The mysterious bronze door produced a crack, and a series of shrill laughter, sobbing and shouting echoed in the air. Arms either filled with teeth or completely without skin reached out wildly and grabbed at Steve, whose pustules were bursting one by one. The strange dark green vines that accentuated an infant's face and the slippery, illusory tentacles also bound the Sequence 5 powerhouse. "Ah!" Steve cried out again. The pale yellow pus which flowed out covered his entire body, allowing him to barely resist the pull. A bright red crack appeared on his face, and in it was a hole leading to a dark tunnel. At that moment, Klein raised his revolver and aimed it at him. Without any delay or hesitation, with his face disguised, Klein calmly pulled the trigger while wearing his half-top hat. Bang, bang. With a flash of the sun brooch, 2 bullets filled with holiness accurately hit Steve in the head. Although they didn't pierce his skin or bones, they ignited resplendent flames, turning Steve into a bright torch. Ah! With another scream, Steve was pulled closer to the illusory bronze door. As Klein released the revolver's cylinder, the shells fell to the ground, and he took out the metal box containing the Beyonder bullets. At the same time, he once again injected his spirituality into the sun brooch. 2, 1. A pure and flawless pillar of light fell from the sky and instantly hit Steve's body. Taking this breather, Klein inserted 3 purifying bullets and 3 exorcism bullets into the cylinder and snapped it shut. He aimed at Steve's head again, and with the flash of the dark golden brooch, he pulled the trigger hard, 6 times in a row. Bang, 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 bang. 350 splendid fireworks one by one, the bullets sliced through the air, either swirling with a golden luster or emitting resplendent beams as they hit Steve's head. Thanks to a clown's control over his body and his persistence in practicing his marksmanship, Klein's 6 bullets, which were augmented with cleave of purification, accurately hit the same spot as the first 2 bullets. They were like fists from a giant of light, repeatedly pounding at the left of Steve's face. With a series of bangs, Steve, who had been entangled by the strange arms and the dark green vines, failed to phase away to avoid the attack. His head was whipped to the side repeatedly as his body trembled. His cheekbones quickly caved in, breaking out into sharp white bones. Bang! The last bullet completely tore through, splashing the Sequence 5 powerhouse's dark red blood. This opening allowed the resplendent and golden flames to continuously drill in, burning into bursts of dark green mist. In the holy light, Steve's clothes were ignited. His body was quickly charred as he dripped with grease. However, he was still alive. Compared to Nimblewright Master Risago, the survivability of a Sequence 5 from the mutant pathway was clearly much better. However, the heavily injured Steve could no longer resist the strange tugging arms. His legs moved forward uncontrollably, almost flying towards that bronze door and into the deep crack that had opened. He was thrown into the darkness where pairs of eyes lurked. At this moment, Sharon suddenly clenched her right hand, her forehead covered in sweat. The illusory and subtle rays of light were abruptly severed, and the indescribably mysterious bronze door lost the source of its existence. It swayed, and before Steve entered, it reluctantly pulled back its long arms, which were either filled with teeth or blood, and sealed the crack. Creak. The door closed, quickly becoming transparent before it disappeared. Steve's leaning body was rigid in place, blackened and shriveled, like a mummified corpse that had been burned for a long time. With her right fist tightly clenched and the scarlet lunar corona on her, Sharon's figure rapidly turned incorporeal. She took a step forward and overlapped with Steve. Klein's spirit vision instantly lost sight of her. However, the charred Steve raised his fists and abruptly smashed them against his already severely injured head. Bam! His head turned into a pulp like that of a rotten tomato, and milky white spots sprayed out before splattering to the ground. A translucent figure was also expelled. It rapidly spread out, turning into something that looked like a giant jellyfish. Within it was a dreamlike liquid that was swishing and a pair of deathly pale eyes that were condensing. Sharon was forced out by this strange object, and she reappeared beside it. She suddenly stretched out her left hand, letting out a silent shriek. The ground suddenly turned black, as if it had turned into a muddy deep sea. Twisted bloody vines grew out from it, splitting into many sections, with each section having 4 sharp teeth and an eye. The blood-red vine wildly grew upwards, immediately locking onto the jellyfish-like phantom as it greedily sucked the dreamlike liquid within. The phantom quickly collapsed, and the blood-red vine once again retreated back into the muddy deep sea. But with this delay, the headless, charred Steve began running. He tore across the clearing and headed for the way out. He still wasn't dead despite already losing his head. Steve had only run a few steps when a sudden crisp sound cracked in the silence. Pa! Klein, in a black double-breasted frock coat with a matching half-top hat, turned to him and snapped his fingers. Boom! The dirt beneath Steve's feet was violently lifted, and scarlet flames soared. It spread upward, and when it reached its highest point, it spilled down like beautiful fireworks. Steve's body was torn to pieces from such fireworks. His charred hands, feet, guts, and blood splattered everywhere. One of his fingers rolled to Klein's feet, and the brown, translucent biological poison bottle fell in another direction. The mutilated body, which was the last traces of Steve's existence, squirmed a few times before finally becoming still. In the scene with the blooming fireworks, Klein felt his spirituality become more active, and the powers that still wasn't completely his had become more attuned to him. In response to this sensation, he passed the revolver to his left hand. He took off the silk half-top hat from his head with his black-gloved right hand, and he pressed it to his chest and bowed slightly at Sharon. Sharon's blue eyes looked over. She looked past Klein to the carnage of Werewolf Tyre and Marek. Sharon's figure disappeared, and Tyre's eyes reflected her image. Tyre stood there stiffly, his black hair standing on end. He raised his arms with great difficulty and pressed them against his head. Katja he twisted hard, and his eyes soon saw his spine, which were underneath the cover of his torn clothes. Pa! Tyre twisted and pulled again, pulling his head out of his torso. Throughout the entire process, he didn't let out a single scream or a single word. He held his head, letting the blood constantly drip down. The corpse which had lost its head was still standing straight, without toppling. Sharon didn't immediately leave Tyre's body. She appeared to be attempting something. Very soon, bits of dark green light emerged from Tyre's head and body, quickly condensing onto one of his fangs as its core. It seems like Miss Sharon has a way of accelerating the separation of a Beyonder characteristic. The prerequisite to doing so requires her to possess the target, kill the person, and have complete control of the body. Enlightened, Klein bent down and picked up the shells that had fallen to the ground, stuffing them into the metal square box, one by one. He was afraid that the investigators, which would subsequently arrive, would find the artisan through the uniqueness of the shells, and hence find the woman who had purchased the Briber and Barbarian formulas from him. Then they would lock onto Eye of Wisdom's gathering, causing his safety to be threatened. As for the bullets, they had long been sacrificed to the corresponding deities in the holy light and flames, just like the materials in charms. Putting the revolver away, Klein was about to take a step forward when Sharon appeared beside the biological poison bottle with an exaggerated speed. She made it float up and land on her palm. Before Klein could think of anything else, the pale woman flicked her wrist and threw him a translucent brown bottle and a dark green fang. To save time, she's helping me pick up my spoils. Klein was startled. He instinctively pulled out a piece of paper and covered the two items. He didn't come into direct contact with them. At this moment, he could see that Sharon's complicated black regal dress had lost its usual tidiness and cleanliness. It fluttered gently in the wind, and a few strands of her light blonde hair were stuck to the side of her face, making her feel more like a person. This biological poison bottle comes with its own lid. I just wonder what negative side effects it has. Klein lowered his head and examined his spoils of war. He used the black cap hanging on the side to reseal the biological poison bottle so that it wouldn't continue to do him harm. As for the dark green fang, it was the Beyonder characteristic left behind by Werewolf Tyre. As Klein placed the two items into a small metal box he prepared, and he used holy night powder to create a wall of spirituality, blocking off the influence they had on their surroundings. He watched Sharon's figure disappear from the corner of his eyes. Steve's remnant flesh squirmed and produced a nearly translucent point of light. Similarly, he was still on guard against Marek, lest he suddenly went crazy. Amidst this vigilance, he discovered that the healing powers of a zombie was truly astonishing. The bone-deep wounds from a moment ago had now basically closed. Marek also gave him a profound look. It was as though he had remembered something and understood something. When he was done, Klein walked a dozen steps away, picking up the square metal box that had been dug up by the zombies and shadows. Then he found Azek's copper whistle and the master key, which were surrounded by human-shaped candles. He glanced at it and awkwardly realized that he didn't dare to pick them up. The effects of the scarlet lunar corona were still radiating through the clearing. This was the last trap he had set up, one that would never be used unless all other means were exhausted. For this, he had taken the time to visit a hospital's morgue and test out what the corpses would do after they had got their hands on Azek's copper whistle. It allowed him to design a corresponding plan. Can you stop the influence of the scarlet lunar corona? Klein turned to look at Sharon, who had materialized again. She already had an additional translucent doll in her hand. Without saying a word, Sharon placed the scarlet lunar corona to her chest with her other hand. The circle of rubies quickly dimmed, and the light from the full moon disappeared from the abandoned land. Only then did Klein lean over and grab the keyring with his fingertip, raising up Azek's copper whistle and the master key. Then he stored them in the square iron box with concave bullet marks and quickly created a seal. Meanwhile, Marek circled around and dealt with the scene. Sharon pulled up her small black bonnet and her figure disappeared before reappearing in front of Klein. "The Book of Secrets is in your room," Sharon said calmly. "That is to say, no matter what the end result is, as long as I can make it back alive, I will be able to get a portion of the reward." "I wouldn't have gone through all this trouble for nothing," Klein smiled and bowed. "Thank you for your generosity. The official Beyonders will arrive any time soon. We have to leave." Sharon nodded and asked, "Do you need any help?" "There's no need," Klein chuckled. "I still have lots of fireworks which I haven't released." As soon as he finished his sentence, he raised his hand and snapped his fingers. Boom, boom, boom. The remaining explosives exploded, one by one, sending flames up into the sky. They clustered around the largest and most eye-catching one in the center, producing a dreamy and beautiful scene. Sharon's gaze was instinctively attracted to it for a second, and when she looked back, Klein was no longer there. There was only a spark that gradually dissipated. Away from the clearing, he took a small detour northwest, preventing him from running into any official Beyonders on the way. One match after another was lit on the road, and the flames quickly soared up and then quickly disappeared. Klein's figure constantly emerged from within them as he leaped across the flames and departed the West Balham dock. Immediately following that, he took out a special bottle of extract and wiped it over his face. With a gentle wipe using a piece of paper, he removed all the paint. "Pa!" Klein shook his wrist and burned the paper to ashes. Then he picked up the cane he had hidden nearby, straightened his clothes, and walked out into the street like an ordinary person. Not long after, Klein arrived at a cathedral. Its name was Lever Cathedral. As many devotees weren't rich, they might not be able to rest on Sundays and were usually busy during the day. Thus, the cathedrals of the various churches typically opened until the early hours of the morning, giving most believers the opportunity to pray and repent. Klein looked up, tapped the steps with the black cane in his hand, and stepped inside. He intended to avoid the subsequent round of inspections of the surrounding people. A few minutes later, a machinery hiveman team appeared at the clearing surrounded by abandoned warehouses. There were a total of 5 of them, each armed with different kinds of Beyonder weapons. However, all of them frowned when they saw the cleaned-up scene. After looking for a moment, they began putting in effort to gather clues. Lever Cathedral. Since it wasn't even 11 yet, there were quite a few people here. However, not a single person spoke. The entire prayer hall was so peaceful and holy that no one wanted to break the silence. Klein sat in the third pew along the aisle. He leaned his black cane forward and took off his silk half-top hat. Wearing a black double-breasted frock coat, he clasped his hands against his lower jaw and closed his eyes. His expression was abnormally calm as he faced the triangle-shaped sacred emblem in front of him.